Okay, we're going to start up here. This here is probably one of the most experienced guys in games and in the universe. If you got the announcement, you read his resume. And you know what I'm going to ask you to do is brag on yourself a little bit, though, and do a rundown of your background. Gordon's going to talk about a bunch of stuff. He'll tell you what he's going to talk about. This is very, who's new here? Oh, good. Welcome. Nice. Welcome. That's great. The crowds go up, they go down, and it's just a great way to meet people. And no one here, and we have people that just walk in the door and never heard of what video gaming is. This isn't a geek group. There are a lot of really outstanding geek organizations in town that do, code-specific kind of stuff. We're kind of just more about the entrepreneurial dimension, although we don't really know what we're about. Next month, Richard Garriott, who's the guy who went into outer space. If you don't know who he is, one of the original founders of MMOG environments, and he's got a huge startup that has been funded on Kickstarter. His company is Portalarium, and the whole management team's coming here. And if Richard's in town, now the spaceship, he will be here. They have said. By the way, Obama's, that's very special, let's just say, and then the month after that is, we're going to do an Oculus Rift bake-off. So we're just going to bring a bunch of Oculus Rift goggles in here, and people are building apps. If you've never seen Oculus Rift, a mere $2 billion acquisition by we'll have garbage things in the back so you can throw up from the non 30 to 40%, people experience extreme discomfort. Well, there's a new development kit coming out, but we won't have it by then. Anyway, I'm going to shut up. That's a preview of what's going on. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I mean, again, there's $5 parking with a little card. And some of you who are new here may not know where we are. This is a Capital Factory, which is an incubator, high-tech incubator. And if you memorize all the words on the left and all the words on the right and apply, you can get a startup, and then someone will buy you out in 2 days for $1 trillion. So over to Gordon.
2 days? I'm going to start memorizing. Welcome, everybody. Who here currently works in the game business in some way, shape, or form, or ever has? My condolences to you guys. And what the hell are the rest of you here for? What are you thinking? You need to think more clearly about this. Hopefully I will help in that process before this is all said and done. So as we talked about, I'm Crazy Gordon Walton. This is my 38th year of making games. And so I've been doing this far too long, and my only word of warning is if you make them long enough, you'll look like me. So there you go. There aren't that many people who have been making them as long as I have, and really all the ones that are left look like me or worse. So, because most people
job with Monopoly, though.
Most people go sane, which is good, way before this. So let me see if I can get this thing to fire up and do its thing. We will see if I can make it go. Is it going to work? I tested it before, just to be sure.
There you go.
Yay! Awesome. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Blankety blank blank blank. That sucks. All that work for nothing. So let's see. So about half of you have never made a game. Why are you here? Do a couple of shout outs. Why are you here if you don't make games now? Are you really thinking about that? Are you anybody?
Learn more about the environment.
Okay. Which part of the environment?
Overall landscape, I suppose.
Okay. So like the business landscape and the because you know how to eat this stuff, right? You're already an eater, but you're not a chef. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Anybody else?
Learn more about the industry.
Okay. Anybody just get dragged here unwillingly? Okay, awesome. Yeah, it's good to have some of those too.
I'm a little curious still. So.
Go. Ask. Just a little curious. Okay. Well, let's see. Been doing it a long time. Worked for a crap load of companies. Done my own game company. So I've worked for big publishers. I've been an independent working for big publishers. I've been an independent not working for any big publishers. So I've kind of done the whole gamut at least twice, is what I would say. So I have a pretty good view. And when I started, we were doing stuff on cassette and plastic bags, which was different. So I can't really help you on how do you do it today from scratch, really, because it was just a completely different place and time. But the cool thing about the business and the terrible thing simultaneously is the business changes all the time. All the time. And there is no plateau. There's no place where you can say, okay, I made it. Awesome. Where's the rocking chair? I'll sit there and rock for a while and just revel in my awesomeness. Because the moment you start doing that, you're actually going backwards and the world is changing around you while you're not looking. Let's see. So what am I going to talk about tonight? Real quick. It's not going to take very long. I'm going to talk about what's happened here in Austin from the beginning and what's happening right now, where I think Austin is going and what you guys could do about that to make the future even better. And then we'll have a lot of Q&A. But feel free to stop me anytime along the way, because I don't mind being interactive, since that's what we do here. So I had my wife this morning send me a picture of the t-shirt, which actually has the start date for a whole bunch of studios in town. It doesn't have all the studios, because a bunch of studios were out of business before this t-shirt was done in 2007. But the truth is, our business started really, Steve Jackson Games is a paper game company that has dabbled in video games too, but that was kind of the first gaming presence in town. Richard Garriott, who will be here next month, wrote Ultima 1 and 2 while he was going to college here before he dropped out, and then moved to New Hampshire for a couple of years, and then finally came back in the late 80s and started Origin. And Origin, as it might seem, is a perfect name because Origin became the focus point for how all other gaming really happened in Austin. It was a large publishing organization that also developed games. And many, many, many startups in Austin have spun out of, having worked at Origin at one point or another. EA closed Origin effectively in 2001 here and moved the remaining people to California. So they bought Origin, early 90s and closed it by around 2001. So it's interesting though that today you look at that list. That's a 2007 list. There was probably twice that many companies in town at that point that didn't make the back of the T-shirt. Today we can't get a good count. It's somewhere between 100 and 200 actual game companies in town here. Now it's a giant pyramid, right? Most of those companies are indies doing small games with a few people. Vast majority of them. At the very top of the pyramid, maybe the top 30 companies are companies of 12 or more people. And at the very, very top, there's Electronic Arts, Retro, King's Isle, in kind of the 100 plus range. As a reality, maybe over 100 right now. So, you're talking about 5 or 6 companies at most. You kind of hit that 80 to 500 range in town. And I think that gives you kind of really, most of the people who started all the early companies came from Origin, or they moved here for companies that were started by people who came from Origin. Because a lot of companies got started in kind of the early 90s when Origin got bought. A bunch of people left EA, started companies. Suddenly we were doing console in town, not just PC. We were doing handheld in town. Today, of course, it's a whole different environment. We've got the culture. The reason that Austin's still around. So when I started making games, and even later, in the mid 80s, like a really long time ago, how many people here weren't born by the mid 80s? Okay, see? Jesus. But by that point, there was probably 20 cities in the US that had significant game development going on in them. And today there's really less than 10. And some of the biggest places that used to make games are gone. They just don't make games anymore. So Chicago, I worked in Chicago in '92. Is that right? I think '92. And there were probably 30 game companies in town there. There might be 3 today. And they're all small except for Williams Midway. You know, everything else is tiny. But at that time, it was a big, bustling, it was much bigger than Austin. In fact, New York and Chicago were bigger than everything at that time, but kind of San Francisco. And even Seattle wasn't all that up and coming at that moment in time, even though they had Nintendo as an anchor client, but that was pre-Microsoft really doing games. So the clusters of gaming have changed dramatically over the last 20 plus years, dramatically. And now, you know, we're down to very few, but here's why I think Austin is still around. This is what this slide is about. Why is Austin still here when all these other places kind of went away or became less significant? You know, I think that, you know, the main thing, and we do a lot about this, that we say Austin is weird. And what does weird really mean? I mean, I think it's like, not only are we weird, you know, we kind of celebrate the weird, you know. So, you know, if Leslie can be cool in Austin and anywhere else, she would have been crucified, you know, at a minimum. You know, that makes us much more tolerant, much more interested in having a lot of different expressions going on here. And so that combination here of kind of high tech and art and enough of a cosmopolitan place where people actually don't get mad when people are different than each other, you can have something special happen in an environment that, like ours, which needs creative people from multi-disciplines working together to create cool stuff, which is kind of what we do. You know, most of the B2B startups here can do everything they need with programmers. And somebody gets designated to be a designer, but they probably code too. That's how it normally works. Or they're the business guy who's driving the requirements. Whereas our stuff, we need multiple creative people to work together and somehow or another pull off a miracle and create something that people like. You know, it's not an aspirin, it's not a vitamin, it's not good for you, and it won't cure your headache, but you do it because you want to, which is a total different kind of animal. If you talk to VCs, you know, sometimes they'll go, is an aspirin or a vitamin? We don't fund vitamins because people won't do what's good for them. We only fund aspirin. You got to give them a headache first and then sell them something. You know, it's exactly what they're looking for, because that they know they'll get the money for. Whereas we're selling stuff to people because they want to do it, which is a whole, you know, it's like 2 orders of magnitude more difficult and challenging. So we also had challenges and continue to have some of these. We don't have headquarters companies here. When Austin became a big place to do games, it's because Origin was here. They were their own independent company. And that drew, you know, that was part of the ecosystem. So if you think of a business ecosystem, you know, you can think of one out there, you know, for frogs and birds and whatever, but if you think about a business ecosystem, you need all the pieces in place to make it work. And one of the pieces for a gaming ecosystem is you need anchor tenants. You need big companies who are going to be there and have a steady employment base to support the guys who are underneath it, who are more scrappy and doing more creative things, to support the guys who are even underneath that, who are the indies doing the most crazy stuff, the wild stuff, the stuff that today looks crazy, 5 years from now may be mainstream. Because where does all that stuff come from? It comes from crazy people. You know, everyone who's been really successful later, at some point, was called nuts, because what they were doing wasn't mainstream enough to make it. So, you know, we've always had very few to none anchor tenants here. Today, the biggest company in town that is kind of Texas owned is King's Eye, with about 200 and some odd people. And before that, it was probably Edge of Reality at about the 100 level, who was doing work for other companies, right? So being a job shop for other bigger companies. it's been a while. Aspire is a publisher here, but they're pretty small. They only have a couple dozen people, maybe 3 dozen. They've been as big as 80 or 90, but not in the last few years. So we don't really have Texas-sourced, Austin-sourced companies that everyone who works there is from or in Austin. We have a lot of companies that are extra places like Apple's here with a crap load of people. Right? Most people don't know how many people Apple has here. It's thousands, right, of Apple employees here. But nobody thinks of Austin as the place that Apple's from. Everybody knows that it's from Silicon Valley. But every year they move more people here and have less people there. And they just did a deal with the city to move another few thousand here over the next 5 or 6 years. So we have all this stuff going on, right? Crazy stuff going on like that. But what we don't have is we don't have the full ecosystem going on at the very top level and haven't for years. And because of that, that means that the people with the expertise in business and marketing and sales don't tend to be here. They're at the headquarters companies, which means we don't have a full set of skill sets when we do want to make our own company. Who are we going to steal those people from? This is the real job of the anchor tenants, is to be stolen from by the companies. That is their purpose in life, is to create talent that we can steal. Is my outlook on it. Because not everybody, some people do want a steady job for, when you get the gold watch or whatever. It's kind of crazy today to think that way, but there's a natural need to not have change for some people. But the truth is that most of us are going to change jobs a bazillion times, like I have. I was an early trender on that for some reason. Probably because I wasn't employable, really, is what I'm thinking was the real reason. So, what are we today? We're somewhere, so we bounce back and forth between third or fourth. So we're always fighting it out with Seattle. We're either third or the fourth largest cluster of gaming in the USA. And Seattle has a big advantage on us. They have Microsoft and they have Nintendo. They have 2 giant anchor tenants plus several other companies that are sourced. So, but at the same time, we have a crap load of people here making games. Last time we tried to do a big count, it was about, of all the people who touch games and not all people who made games, but people who were in the game could be categorized, was up in the 7,000 level, which is a lot of people when you get down to it. So, but we still have these lacks even today. We just don't have big companies. So big companies are the ones who give capital to little companies to either buy their stuff or to have it made, have something made that they want to do. And so we're all, when I first started making games, I was in Bryan College Station, right? I wasn't here, I was over there in Aggie Land. And what did I have to do? I had to get on a plane, fly to San Francisco, and find people to give me money to make games for me. That's what I did. You don't even want to know. Pre-fax. You literally went and knocked on the door, right? Just showed up. So that's crazy. Can't do that today. So, what else about Austin? Today, Austin's the 11th largest city in the U.S., up 2 from just 2 years ago, which is, again, crazy, right? Sounding. And of course, we got tons of jobs, and we have low unemployment. There's lots of good things going on in Austin. Austin is growing like crazy. And its job growth tends to be number 1 or number 2, by the way, in the U.S., of all the big metro areas. So everybody's moving to Austin, in case you haven't noticed. And they're going to continue to move to Austin until we wake up and go, wait a minute, there's too many people here. Maybe this isn't awesome as it used to be. So what else that's interesting about Austin? Very highly educated on average. Very highly educated, which is interesting if you didn't know that already. Just how many people here actually finish their degrees and are actually in the workforce is a gigantic number. And that makes us very attractive to a whole bunch of quote unquote anchor tenants. And other companies want to come here because they want an educated workforce. They want that. And some of that's us doing good, some of that's everything else getting worse. Right? But it doesn't matter. Relatively, we're doing great, which is the most important thing. So this is a little small, sorry about that. This is software, basically software guys. That's median, 90th percentile, and the red line is Austin. So what does this say? We're the cheapest place to hire people who know how to code in a lot of the big cities, which is why people come here, right? The cost of living is lower than most of the other major metro areas. But as you can see, we're not talking about a tiny amount, a giant amount lower, right? It's just a little lower, but it's just enough to make sense to it. And the other thing that's interesting over here is people working on computer and math stuff, 50,000 people. There's about 50,000 coders in town. This is, that's a nice little, that's 5 divisions. It's, make a little army out of that. If you could ever get them to do anything, but it's one fell swoop, it's kind of a challenge. And there's also, 14,500 people in the arts here who make their living in the arts. And that includes people in design, people who are artists who do that for a living. So we have this, it doesn't seem like that many people relative to the almost 2 million that we are today, but it's a big percentage versus most other places. And that, again, makes us attractive for the kind of work that we're doing here. So, yeehaw. All right, so there's a bunch of stuff on here, and I put my email up here so you can email me. I will send you a ton of links. I will send you documents. There's some very cool documents. I have some of them up here. So just in the last 3 months, it looked to me like there were 60 companies that had either moved here, major companies that had moved here or done a major expansion here. And that was about at twice the rate of last year. So this document shows everybody did it in 2013, and then it shows the first 3 months, and the first 3 months were half as big as all of last year. So big companies are moving here like crazy or expanding here because they go, well, where are we going to get people? We're going to get them here at loss or any other place. 43 venture firms have offices here. So in 2005, before my partner and I started BioWare Austin here, our alternative plan is we were going to go raise money and actually build some stuff. And we went to every venture firm in town, all 3 of them. There were, you'd go to Dallas to see 43 firms, or you go to Houston to see half that many, or you go to California to see a bazillion, right? It was the only way it worked. All of a sudden, literally in 8 years, Austin got, 10 times the number plus of venture firms who are actually here, and they actually do deals here. They do deals in Texas. And there are California firms that do deals here and Dallas firms that do deals here, but it's harder, right? It's a very small subset that you start doing research. You're sitting capital factor, right? Which is cool. It's the most expensive one of these things here, but it's cool because they're really high. They have cool windows. But there are so many co-working places in town, accelerators. So if you want to start a business, how many of those will really entertain somebody doing consumer or games? Maybe 3 of those 12-ish, 3 or 4 of them would do a game thing. Because it's kind of alien. Mostly they want to do stuff that's going to work. And most of them think, well, games aren't going to work. Because in fact, that's kind of true. If you think about, so even in the heyday of when the games business was much more structured, and it was PC and console. So in PC and console, I want to think of a good year, maybe about 98, 2000 range. There was typically about 2,000 releases, 2,000 game title releases in that time frame, of which you never heard of more than 200 of them. And that's not even counting the ones that got killed before they were released. There'd be about 2,000 releases, you'd hear about 200 of them, 20 of them would be a hit and make money. So it's a very brutal business. It's a very incredibly brutal business in that sense. And that was when it was nice and structured and people actually were making sure they were looking at those games and making sure they were the right games to build. And yada yada. The experts were doing it. Yeah, that's right. The experts were doing it there. And their hit ratio was literally 1 or 2% of the time. So it's really difficult. business. And most of the people who've invested in games, because of the percentages, have lost money, so they typically don't do it again. What else? So this is a great link. 1,700 startup companies in town. You know, internet/startup companies. Now some of those companies are now 5 years old. They started here, and it's just, and that number grows all the time. It's a crazy number. You know, even with the net numbers growing, even with the deaths, the net numbers grow. And finally, Austin Tech Map kind of shows you where they are. Where are they? They're clustered down here, and then they're kind of spread up on the north corridor, and then they're kind of scattered everywhere else. So there's kind of, you know, the northwest corridor used to be the high-tech corridor, but a lot of that has now moved downtown too. As you know, the city and the city's tilting the playing field to say come back downtown. So, well, what does all this mean? It really means we're in the right place at the right time. If you want to start a business, there's probably the only better place to go is San Francisco, and then you're in with the sharks, and you probably are not ready for it. Whereas Austin's a lot better about being friendly about stuff. We haven't learned to be killers yet, quite yet, like the Bay Area. So it really is a great place if you want to start a business, because you're going to find a lot of people who will help you, even if there's nothing in it for them. In the valley, if somebody's helping you, you better check your back pocket, because their hands in it somehow or another. Any questions about any of this stuff? I know I'm not that riveting, but there is some cool data. So let's talk about the future real quick, and then we'll get to Q&A, which is the fun part. You know, first I'm going to talk about the Austin context, then I'm going to talk about the gaming context without Austin, then I'm going to talk about the two together. Because first, context always comes first. So Austin, their projection is we're going to be at 2 million people in the SMSA here in 2050. 1 year from now, we're going to hit 2 million people. Now, it's a long way from 11 to 10, by the way. So I don't think that we're going to be the 10th largest city anytime super soon. But that's a lot of people. And the projection is we're going to be at 4 million by 2040. So most of y'all will see that. I hope I don't. And you can see the red line is Austin's percentage growth over all the other major SMSAs. So we are just off the charts, growing faster than everybody else. The combination of our quality of life and cost of living, which will be destroyed by all those people coming, by the way. It's a minor detail. As the locusts migrate, it doesn't help the crop. The other thing that's going to change is our ethnicity is going to change. We are in the midst of a transition to a much more multicultural world, and Austin is right in the center of that. So, in fact, 2030, is kind of the crossover moment when suddenly the European population versus the Hispanic population is going to flip over. And this is just an ongoing thing. We are a very cosmopolitan city, and it's all good stuff in the big scheme of things. It also means we need to think about customers maybe differently than we have. We typically make stuff for ourselves and not for everybody in the world. All right, the gaming market. What's going to happen to gaming? Well, on the big trend lines, it's only gotten more chaotic, and guess what? It probably will only get even crazier in the big scheme of things. Now, occasionally there'll be little micro calming, like somebody will lock up some market for a little bit, and they'll kind of own it, and there'll be some semblance of stability. But even Facebook wasn't stable, right? Owning a whole segment, they couldn't keep it stable, doing it themselves, right? So I think that we're just going to see more in the business model stuff. Let me think of the right way to put this. So basically the old model, right? So we're in the midst of what happened to music. Gaming is right in the midst of what happened to music. Music companies used to be run by the big 6 publishers. You could say 8 maybe. But in the end, there were guys who owned the music business, and they kind of did the distribution. They owned all the distribution. They're the ones who put the stuff on first cassettes, then on CDs, to give it to you, and finally, and then this crazy internet thing came along, and people could actually, it was pretty easy for me to give you a cassette or a CD. But now, I can just send it to you over the internet. Boom. And all those guys got killed. All the big guys who used to own the whole business are shadows of their former self. Absolute shadows. If you look at the TV and cable business, it's the same thing, frankly. If you look at audiences for TV and for all the stuff on broadcast television, the audiences are shadows of what they were 15, 20 years ago already. Some of that is more choices. A lot of it's more choices. But in the end, a business that looked unassailable is suddenly super vulnerable and has to restructure. And the challenge with all businesses is once they're set up a certain way, very, very difficult for them to change. All their patterns inside, all their, if they were an organism, they'd have genetic programming that made them perfect for their environment. And when the environment changes, they go extinct. That's exactly what's happened. Because they can't genetically change fast enough. Particularly if they were in a niche of dominance, where they weren't challenged. So all the people left are not the people who are scrappy, they're the people who are playing defense. So we have this thing going on in gaming right now as we speak. And it's kind of being masked at some level by the new platforms. All the new platforms make it look like there's more activity going on. But what's happening is the gaming business was actually a very high margin business. I remember being in Origin, what was that, 99, and I did this thing where I doubled the size of an online game, which had, at that point about a 40 to 45 point margin. And I got yelled at. Why did I get yelled at? Because suddenly, my low margin game was dragging down all the 65% margin games, right? So the more money I made, the more I affected the bottom line of the entire company because I didn't make the same margin. So this is how big companies are, right? They get used to a certain pattern. This is our market, this is what we deserve. They are entitled to a particular business model. And so right now, so you look at Activision and EA. So I was in EA until 3 or 4 years ago, right? And in EA, CEO comes in and says, we're going to transition to the online world. We're going to do it because he sees the future. And he goes, oh, shit, we're going to be there. And if we don't start now, we're going to be screwed. And what did it mean? He lost money a lot. He was struggling to drag the company to start operating a new way. Meantime, Activision says, screw all that stuff. We're just going to make the best cool stuff. And next thing you know, Activision's bigger than EA. More profitable, looks awesome. But they don't dabble in any of the new stuff. And one day, how many people here have read The Innovator's Dilemma? Anybody? Oh, Jesus, only a couple people. Really need to read that book, Innovator's Dilemma. Because it kind of explains to you how businesses die because they're cut out from people from the low one. Literally, the low margin operators come in and kill high margin businesses. And they don't start out looking like they would never do it. But what they do is they incrementally kind of undermine you like termites, and one day you fall over to death. And one day that's going to happen to Activision, unless they buy their way into the new stuff brilliantly, because most companies can't do it. They buy stuff and they break it. If you're ever, how many people here have been part of a acquisition or merger? They call them mergers, but they're always that. Somebody's acquiring somebody. Okay, how many of them worked? Any? None, right. It's always fucked up, sorry. It always is screwed up. And that's because you're always, somebody's in charge. There's rarely, I've almost never seen a merger of equals. One. So somebody's culture is the dominant culture. And the dominant culture has to kill the subordinate culture. And when they do that, they completely change the company and run off all the talent. And it's a very predictable pattern. And companies still do it all day long. There's a bunch of M&A guys out there trying to figure out how to match make two, when we put you two together, you're going to be equal to 3. And yeah, almost all the time you're equal to either 0 or maybe 1 1/4. It's kind of how it works out. Either it takes them both down, or you barely get this tiny increment for what that you paid 2x for. So all this stuff is going on in our overall business. But all the new platforms have masked it to some degree because there's all this activity. But if you actually look at the dollars, if you look at the actual dollars, our new business is a low margin, low volume business relative to what it used to be. So it used to be, like I said, 65% margin on selling boxed goods. Pretty awesome when you had a hit. You didn't have a hit, the margin was zero because you spent more than you made, period. But if you ever got anything to scale, it was extremely profitable, and those few profitable things paid for all the other failures. That was the model. It was almost a venture capital model. Publishers were the venture capitalists for game developers. They would go out and do 10 bets knowing that 9 of them were going to fail completely. And they would curate them and try to make them as good as they could. And the smart ones would kill them early and often, and the dumb ones would get them all the way to launch and say, well, we're going to get some of our money back, which you never do. You just spend more money and don't get it back. That's what happens when you launch a dog. So, and a dog may not mean it's a bad game. It may mean it's the wrong game at the wrong time for a particular audience. So I've seen some really, games I thought were really cool. They couldn't find an audience big enough to support what they cost. And the people who made it didn't think they were making a dog, but it was a financial dog, even if it was a critical success. That happens when you do entertainment. And we are entertainment and consumer high tech. That's what we are. We have two highly motive things intersecting together, and we don't get a multiplier, we get an exponential out of it, which is fun, particularly when you're doing 3-year games, trying to guess what the market is 3 years from now. What's cool about that? You're doing much shorter games, so you don't have to guess quite as far in advance with the new platforms. So you're going to see even more new platforms. You're not going to see less, you're going to see more. Now, do I think we're going to see 3 times more? I'm not so sure about that. But we're going to see platforms kind of rise and fall faster. We're going to see faster cycles of platforms where they come and they go quicker than they used to. We've already seen this in multiple cases. Anytime you get a platform to last 5+ years, you're actually doing good. That's what it boils down to. That means that you've actually made something that's sticky enough to where you can make your money back on. And the other thing that's going to happen is differentiation is going to have a larger premium on it. Meaning that if you can actually stand out in the marketplace in any way, shape, or form, that's worth something. That's worth a lot today. Because it's hard to find what you're looking for in the sea of crap. And not all of it's crap, right? But for what you want right this moment, you look at it and go, I don't want that, it's crap. Right? I don't want this, it's crap. I'm looking for a shooter. And all these strategy games, are crap. Or I'm looking for a strategy game. All these shooters are crap. But there's a sea of all that stuff coming at you all the time. So finding ways to get your message out by what you build that you differentiated enough, it's going to be, so the premium at some level is going to be on creativity and design that is usable with a market. It just doesn't mean you make something cool that's creative. It means it's creative and customers appreciate it. That's where the differentiation is coming. So we're almost the end. So, futures that I'd like to see, I'd like us to think about, could we be like, with the live music capital, wouldn't it be cool to be kind of the indie game capital? That'd be kind of cool, right? We had enough of that going on, and how would you demonstrate that? Because we're really not the live capital, music capital world of everybody. We're really not. But we said we were, and so we are. Perception is reality at some level. And if we can say we are, then in essence, if nobody else steps up to claim it and is willing to fight for it, then we will be. But we have to have some show to go, we have to have some go to go with that show, right? There has to be some go there, something to prove it. Could we be the creative capital? I think we have a good shot at it. We still have the environment that's going to allow creativity to occur. Literally, so how many people here have lived in Houston? Dallas? Okay. Can you imagine transplanting some of Boston to either one of them and not getting a brick on your head as you walk down the street or something? Yeah. I remember being a kid and getting beer bottles thrown at me out of pickup trucks because my hair was a little long. So it's just there's places where the environment is conducive and there's places where the environment is not. And we still have a place where the environment is conducive to different, to creativity in a way that many other places are not. So we have a natural advantage which we should use, an unfair advantage, and it's lots of other places. And even places that claim some level of creativity, it tends to be a very tiny, narrow piece of it, hidden somewhere. San Francisco is, the Bay Area is our biggest competitor in a lot of things, and this is one of them. In the big scheme of things, I mean, they were a bohemian city way before, Austin was anything but a county, right? So they've got a little head start on us, but they're kind of tired, kind of old and tired now, and expensive. I think that we've got to build, in the end, it's about building the games, right? And the games are the things that are going to build companies. So we're sitting right now with a company, one little company has 2 hit games and, sold half their company, and they're worth $1.5 billion for half their company. They have 2 games, period. End of story. You got nothing else on mobile, period. Crazy, nuts, right? There's the Puzzles and Dragons guys over in Japan. Their market cap is almost as big as EA's. They got 1 game. Well, they actually have a bunch of other games you've never heard of, but they have 1 big hit game. Right? So we're living in a completely topsy-turvy, bizarro world, which means that just a few people can put together something, and if it resonates, they can build an entire segment of the industry out. And that's kind of cool. That's almost as cool as when I started this. It's actually cooler because there's more zeros involved than there used to be. So, the only thing that's really changing in the business is that there's more zeros and there's more chaos. So, I think that if we make great games, we'll get the companies that are here. If we make those games here, and the people here who make them are smart and don't just sell out the first time they get a chance, they'll build companies here that mean something. And I think that starts to create an infrastructure all by itself. But just the fact that we make hits changes everything about the perception. Because people still believe in magic, in case you don't know that. All these rational people are very irrational. All buying decisions are made irrationally. We all like to think we're really logical, but sorry, we're still human. We have all the bugs in our OSs that everybody else has. And there's lots of bugs in the OS. Or we couldn't make games. We made games to actually work on the bugs in your operating system, to make them more addictive and make them more interesting and make them more compelling. So we all have these bugs, and I think that part of one of the bugs is we believe in magic. So if a place appears to be a place where great stuff is happening, more great people come, and you get even a better cluster of people who's doing that. So it's pretty interesting. We also have the schooling thing going on here. We finally, after I think I've worked on it for more than 10 years, trying to get anything going at UT, and suddenly we have both the UT graduate certificate and an undergraduate program. And it took forever to make that happen, but just forever. And it's just because education doesn't run the way that their PR is much better than their reality. That's all I'll say. They sound like, we're here for the public. We're doing public education. No, they're reaching their hand into your pocket, is what they're actually doing. And doing some public education. Yes, sir.
I'm a former teacher, so I know exactly what you mean. But I'm trying to find the combination between learning sciences and game mechanics. And I'm curious to know, you say world-class gaming education. I just wanted to know what you see as being.
Well, this is one of the things I didn't put up there. So games are everything now. Right? Games are everything. So when I think of the entertainment part, because that's what I come out of. But in fact, part of the big palette is not just all the platforms, it's all the places games are being used now, which are not, quote unquote, entertainment only games. They're learning games. There's business games. They're gamifying stuff for work. Right? In the end, we've raised a whole generation of game players, right? They're not going to work unless they're playing a game. That's how it's going to work out, right? They're going to be lazy slackers. So I think, the application of what we know is going to be very widespread. And so the skills are going to be, and again, that's going to create a cluster of high demand. We're already seeing that. There's serious game companies here in town. We're starting to have just as many as there were in San Antonio, because San Antonio is more of a kind of military contracting place, and they had more kind of serious game stuff going on for a little while. It looks like now we've overtaken them already, because again, the cluster of talent can move between those kind of jobs versus, and so the more of them that are in one place, the more attractive it is for companies to be here to try to find those people or make more of them. But yeah, that's coming. And I just, like most people, I'm laser focused on my part. But the truth is, again, giant palette, not just a platform, but an application.
But in terms of what you created at
I didn't create anything. All I did was whine at politicians and eventually they did something. So
that was the tipping point.
well, no, they actually, it's all about greed. It's typically not about whining, it's about greed. So when they sniff money, then they show up and they do stuff. So, or votes in the case of politicians. So, yeah, you always need to go to people's basis motivation, and then you can get somewhere. Another thing take into account. But no, the gaming program is a multidisciplinary program, which is mostly focused on game stuff, but the application is much wider than that. And that, like any place, they're going to look for the research money, and wherever the research money comes from, the program gets steered more.
You should also,
I thought you had a little bag. Evil man.
Austin Community College, I think, has one of the
Oh yeah, they have a program too.
high value added, inexpensive. I mean, you get a game degree for professional, right?
St. Edward's has a program
Yeah,
at master's
St.
level. I didn't mention ACC, but I'm the chair of their program advisory board too. Compulsive volunteer, which is retarded. But that's a that's a 2-year program. At one point, we almost got Full Sail to open up a place here. The city was working on that at one point. So, we have at this point a fair amount of incoming talent. On top of the people who are moving here, we have incoming talent from our own programs, and that'll just get better over time. It takes a few years for those programs to kind of settle in and start really producing more valuable people. But the best and the brightest, the ones who need that kind of level of incidence or creativity added, the 5% creativity rather than 2%, show up in those programs. So they're very highly motivated, which helps. Let's see what else. So what do I want you guys to do if you're going to do this? I mean, you only get to kind of go through this once. You might as well do it on your terms rather than on somebody else's terms. So just do cool stuff. Part of the, we have a big burnout thing that goes on in the gaming business because people work on stuff that they aren't that passionate about. They get stuck on it for years. It's a crap, and if you don't like what you're doing, if you don't really love it, then it just steals energy from you. It doesn't give you any energy back. And people who do get burned out of the game business and they do quit, they go sane is what I call it. Anybody who leaves the business is going sane. And it hasn't happened to me yet. I keep hoping, but I just keep trying to get there. But I have seen people actually go sane and be happy. And really, you should do stuff that makes you happy. Is the way it should work in life. And particularly, where we are at this place and time. But I think that part about being happy doing this is not just kind of self-fulfillment. It's really about finding audiences and understanding it. And, doing stuff that's going to touch a lot of people. It's really what you should be motivated by. If you're doing games just for money, you're probably not going to be successful. If you're doing games just for yourself, you better hope that you're a very right in the middle of the road of a gigantic cohort of people who love exactly what you do. And it's not uncommon when you first start making games to make games that you would love to play, right? You should do that. But in the end, your craft is about how are you messing with people's heads. So you better be thinking about, okay, how do I get the most heads to mess with it? Because the more successful I am, the more of these games I get to make, rather than the fewer. And you're going to have to, no slackerness, right? The whole Austin slacker thing doesn't work with these things. Because the market's moving fast all the time. You've got to be on top of it. You have to be embrace it. You can't just say, oh yeah, I'm riding the wave. You need to be figuring out how to get all the way to the right part of the wave, right on the front end so it doesn't crash on top of you. When you're right at the back end of the wave, bad things can happen to you. You need to be way up front. Way up front. If you want to not have bad things happen to you on that. And frankly, you're more likely to be a leader if you're out front. Right? And yes, it's dangerous. You know, you're going to make some mistakes. But typically, there's more forgiveness for the early mistakes than the later mistakes in the big scheme of things. And, you know, every time you ship a game, just think about it. Is this game what I want it to be? Is it the one? Is it ready? Right? Quite often teams are buffaloed into shipping games, but they should just put their foot down and say, guess what? If we all leave today, you can't ship the fucking game. So it's not ready for another 2 weeks. We need to, you know, you can have it. You can have it today, and it won't work, or you can have it in 2 weeks and it'll be good. And rarely have I seen teams do that, but really cohesive teams can pull it off. Because in the end, no one will care. Yeah, so there are people in the organization who really care when stuff is late, but they really like it more when it works. You know, they're never going to remember that it was late if it works. They always remember, you know, that it was late when it fails, right? Or when it fails, they always remember that too. You get targeted that much. So, questions, concerns, challenges. I'm up for it all. So,
What is the common thread you're talking about games failing when they reach the market? What such a high failure rate? What is the common thread with those games that fail?
a vast majority. Well, I don't think there is one common thread. I think it's like a litany of things. A game is like a multi-legged stool, and all you need is one leg to be off, and it's tilted, and you slide right off. It doesn't work. Right? It's a highly tuned, multi-variable machine that everything has to work right. But the number one variable that people screw up is they screw up audience. They don't test their game against the audience. They don't make sure that the thing is going to work. And it's hard sometimes because games are not just, oh, if they test it for 10 minutes and they love it, we're golden. You know, if the game is a long-term game where you're trying to keep them a long time, it's really hard to test that.
What is
It's
being
really hard to test it before the game's actually totally ready. So it's a big challenge. It's always been a big challenge. But I think the biggest misses are about people, the group thing. Everybody's looked at it, they all love it. They think everyone else will love it, but they aren't everyone else. They're that group. And it's a typical product, that's a typical product development problem. And it's just compounded in games. Because nobody has to buy games. You know, I might have to buy some software for my sales guys, or I might have to buy some productivity software for the people who work in my company. There's all kinds of software I have to buy, but I don't have to buy a game, which means it better be awesome. I'm not gonna buy it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what's being done within the industry in order to improve on those, that type of data, that type of research before the game is put out?
Well, it's pretty intermittent still. Well, if you think about it, so most entertainment things, particularly entertainment things that are, well, any business that's emerging, and even though we've been around a long time, I'm really old, right? So the business has been around a long time at some level, right? But at the same time, it's never the same business, 5 years to 5 years to one. So it's an emerging business at the same time it's been around a while. It's still always emerging and changing. And what that means, you know, so one way to think about it is kind of like a frontier. You know, all the pirates and swashbucklers and con artists and everybody else who, you know, is probably not suited to be in the real world, all show up there. And they kind of move through for a while and cause a lot of damage, and then they go away. And our business is filled with that. And, you know, the number of massive, gigantic, stupid things that I've seen and pattern matched over and over again. You know, I can blame my hair for that, but that's not what happened. It was all the people really that worked for me that made my hair fall out. So, but the you know, the truth is that, you know, the lessons aren't learned because we're not a steady state business, right? So most of the people who are even execs at most of the large companies have less than 15 years doing that. They come from other businesses. They try to apply the language and the learnings from other businesses to this business, and it typically doesn't work very well. There are people who are very scientific about how they approach market segmentation and market application of games. But the problem is that even when they do that, they aren't always successful. So it's not like a prescription that you can do. What people want is they want a checklist. You go, okay, if I follow this checklist, I will be successful. And in entertainment, no checklist will make you successful. Is the challenge. It can eliminate a bunch of things that can kill you, but it can't eliminate all the things that can kill you.
I have two questions that really on behalf of the.
I thought you were going to contribute to that part, because that's part of what you do.
Yeah,
you help people with that.
But it's interesting to your question, because we do user and audience experience testing, and not QA like you have a bug here. I think back about your alley, the North Hollywood thing, and you find the large game companies do it in-house. Nobody else in the game industry does it. So we tend to focus off on the interactive side, the agencies that get audience, that get advertising. And what's going to happen, you have 250,000 games out there, or casual games. And the only way you're going to make money is, for purchase or advertising. So there's going to be a huge need for people to get all of that. But you see on the agency side and the brand side, when they're, a company sponsoring a game, like McDonald's doing augmented reality, but you don't find it typically, in the game industry per se.
Well, you know what? Margin difference. There's shitloads of margin when you're doing the ad stuff. The ad agencies are not low margin businesses in the big scheme of things.
Yeah.
And the people with big brands are not afraid to spend money to get the right things done.
Indie filmmakers don't test either, for the
they don't have the money.
Yeah.
And neither do small game makers. They don't have the money.
Here's two questions for you, just that I always get from everyone, every meeting, One is, gee, I'm sort of sniffing out the game thing. It is a $100 billion industry, Austin's got all these great attributes. Where do I start, right? What should I do? And we've got everything from 5 people just building games themselves that don't get paid, and they just sort of swap the way you make up, and then you film. On the other end of the spectrum, there are large studios. So that's one set of questions that like get some dialogue going on. The other question is the ecosystem thing. Richard Garriott, he's not here for this. Guys will be here next time. I'm talking about this ecosystem thing. The problem is the game industry ecosystem is morphing upside down.
Crazy.
So, Rich and I were talking, that sort of agreed on this, that there's no adult supervision, meaning no people that know how to run.
Never has been. When I get called the adult in the room, it's not a good sign.
Right. Well, that's Sony put you in charge of the adult.
I've been put in charge of a whole bunch of things I probably shouldn't.
But the ecosystem here, and in particular publishing, the role of the publisher, if there were a publisher in Austin, what would they be doing in this whole new world?
Well, they'd be dying like the rest of them. But
Yeah.
besides that,
Yeah.
so you have to step back to what a publisher's role is supposed to be versus what it actually is. So even 10 years ago, right, what publishers were is the people who had a stranglehold on distribution. If you made a game, you couldn't get it out to anybody because the control of the games that went into the stores was controlled by these companies. And if you said, oh, I'm going to make my own publisher, you know how many people tried to make a publisher from about 1990 to, to the point where they're not relevant anymore, which is about now? Had to be at least 1,000 people trying to build a publisher. And all those publishers, almost none of them, I'm talking about like there's 5 of them left in some form. I don't mean that they're a big publisher. Nobody actually became a big publisher after really Take-Two, which was a long time ago. So it's just incredibly difficult, and THQ is gone now, which was one of the other people in that kind of time frame. It just wasn't a way to go. It was so capital intensive and so easy to screw up to where if nobody had the money to go, okay, if we do 10 games this year, if none of them are hits, guess what, we're out of business. Because they didn't have the capital to stand getting 0 hits in. Couldn't raise enough money to make it on to the mechanics.
Well, let me click up, I should. What is missing in the ecosystem here?
No, companies based on hits that are sourced here and that have suddenly built a business and sales and marketing expertise.
Right, so that sales.
So they have a great game. Today you can actually reach a market without having to go through somebody who's going to curate you. Basically steal half your money, is the other part of it. And in the old days, they were stealing 70% of your money, not half of it, actually even more sometimes. So, you know, they would get the lion's share of the stuff because they had a gate that you could not go through without. They were gatekeepers. They had the gate. If you didn't go to them, you got zero money. If you went to them, you got a percentage of your money. Maybe. Maybe. And that's the way it worked, right? And if you look at book publishing business pre-ebook, it was the same thing, right? Publishers were people who were gatekeepers who would supposedly curate stuff that would sell. Sometimes they would fund the creative work to get it out there. They would give advances. Our whole system came from books at some level. People would give advances for books and then write the book and then publish the book. And so people would say, hey, I want to make this game, publish this. I want that game made. I'll give you an advance. You go make the game and then we'll publish it. And then maybe you'll get some money after you pay back your advance first, right? And maybe it was, you know, about 80 or 90% of the time you get zero. Yeah.
All right, so in helping build that ecosystem here, do you need, like we refer to big productions as tentpoles, I guess it's called AAA titles?
No, but I don't want to build one of those companies like artificially. They have to come from games that are made here.
That's what I'm saying. If you make a game here, we have a AAA title,
Yeah.
right? The AAA titles would range from $20 to $50 million.
Well, you're thinking about one kind of platform.
Well, that's what I'm asking you. That's what I'm curious.
It doesn't really matter to me about the platforms. It matters to me about the hits. And the hardest place to make AAA games is in console because they're so expensive and you're stuck with publishers. You can't get out the publishing cycle.
Yeah, we have some, the one segment of the market that's growing and is big bucks to play in it, so there's a barrier to entry, is actually Gordon's area, one of his many areas of expertise, PhD expertise, is massive online.
Yeah.
So we've got Cloud Imperium. I mean, they have a Santa Monica studio, but they're up to about 40 million in funding.
41 billion for 417,000 people.
Yeah, and they're just building it.
$80,000
They're doing it modularly, and then we've got Richard with Shroud of the Avatar, who's again an online MMO.
But that's a company that's really located in LA. They just have a big office.
Cloud Imperium, exactly. Yeah.
It's not. We'll get some credit for it, but in the end, it's not here, and we need stuff here. So that's the key because that's what creates the kind of magic. You know, it's like a positive feedback cycle versus a negative. You know, there's the cycle of despair where bad things just keep getting worse, and then there's a positive feedback cycle, which is much harder to get started. But if you can get it started, you can actually get some cool things to happen from it.
So there's a company in LA called The Factory, and they're, I think, a model of the new publisher. They do social media distribution, you know, they push stuff out. So one of the things is that's missing here entirely in Austin. There's a million.
Well, there's lots of companies that kind of do
so
that.
what do you see, if this is a devil's advocate question, obviously, how is anyone going to make money doing this in over 250,000 games where?
Well, most people aren't. It's the truth. I mean, that's part of the brutal truth of it. It's you know, almost the best you can hope for is a lifestyle business, right? Where you find an audience and you can satisfy them and they're big enough. Like, you know, what's happened in the music business. There's a whole bunch of bands now that have a big enough audience to support them, but they're not quote unquote rock stars, right? They're not driving Lamborghinis, they're not living in Hollywood, right? But they have a real business that is ongoing, that's sustainable over time. And I think that's our indie model. Our indie model is going to be people who find a committed audience because of the style and type of games that they do, that stick with them, and then every once in a while they'll make something that'll break out and give them more acquisition of customers. And we got to do a whole bunch of those to find stuff that will get even more wide acceptance.
So if I was sitting here thinking about going in the game industry, because we have a lot of people.
You should do that.
And both. No. I mean, you know, someone here.
I don't want anybody to say, I encourage you to do it ever.
Yeah, right, that's the question, right? So
You have to want to
what
ruin
should
your own
I do,
life.
or where should I go if I'm, checking out the whole game world? Should I just walk away from it? What's your advice, generally, given the holy landscape, or?
Well, no, I think it's always about following your passion. The problem is that a lot of people who come into gaming come from the games that they play. So if they're an Xbox player, their idea of gaming is Xbox centric. It's not phone centric, it's not web centric, it's not anything else. If you really want to understand games and find out where the opportunities are, you really have to go across platform all the time. You have to be looking at games on multiple platforms, not on the one that's your comfort level, right? Or the place where you had that peak experience sometime, and now every time you see it, you have that nice warm, glowy feeling about it. When you pick up that controller, you go, oh, Xbox, you're awesome. No, I mean, it's just a platform, right? All of them are just delivery platforms. To me, the important thing is, are you going to be passionate about it? Because it's going to take effort. If you're going to be in the arts, which is really what games is, you better be darn passionate about it, because it's going to take inordinate effort at times. And I'm not talking about crunching, I'm talking about energy. I'm talking about your energy. We were talking about, people get stuck on game teams and the energy flow is negative, right? It's all, your energy goes in and nothing comes back. So things at work are where you're putting energy into it and you're going, wow, this is cooler. Wow, this is cooler. It's feeding you energy back. And when that happens, when that virtuous cycle happens, when on something you're working on, it's no longer work, it's play. It's fulfillment to do the work. And so whatever you're doing, you should be working on something with fulfillment to do the work. And if games is not that for you, you shouldn't be making games. If you're in another business, you need to be looking for something that gives you that fulfillment back. Because frankly, otherwise it's a job. And if you're gonna have a job, get a job that pays a whole lot and doesn't require very much work or thought or mental commitment. As a programmer, the best place to go if you want to make the most money for the least amount of craziness is you should go to Wall Street or any bank, and you'll make more money for less hours doing coding than you could doing any other thing. But most people who code, like most people who make games, are doing it because they enjoy the actual fundamental work. And so they're looking for a particular set of complex problems to solve, and that's where they get their endorphins. So you need to be doing stuff that gives you endorphins. That's not illegal or all those other things, unless you really want to, and then that's okay too. Yes, sir.
You mentioned on your slide Finland, and I was just wondering if you had specifics from what you've seen them do instead.
Well, I mean, look at Clash of Clans, Supercell, and go to yourself, okay, WTF.
Good games, obviously, but
Well, it doesn't matter whether they're good or not, they're gigantic. That's the key. I mean, those guys did something inordinate. They pulled off a game that managed to hit the right zeitgeist at the right time and become viral on its own. And they got to a virtuous cycle where it was making so much money that they could put more money into it to make it even bigger. And now it's gigantic, right? And so inordinately gigantic that they're worth, like half a VA with 2 games, which is inconceivable. 5 years ago, people said, that's crazy. That's like Flappy Bird becoming #1. It's just crazy. It makes no sense at all, right? So people, and this is the cool thing about the games business, it's not really totally predictable, right? There is no formula where you go, yeah, I know. Because believe me, I got plenty of pattern matching. There's some things that you can know not to do. There's not a formula for success. But you can just go, okay, if I follow the checklist, we will be awesome. We will rule the world. No, because there's always the intangibles that you can't checklist, that you can't figure out. So that's part of what makes it interesting if you like that kind of stuff, where you're, so people say, oh, Gordon, don't you like going to Vegas? I go, I don't need to gamble, I'm in the games business. Jesus, I gamble every day. I don't have to gamble at all anywhere else. It's not even fun. I'm already all gambled out. Yes, Mike?
On saturation in the game software side, I've been hearing a lot of indies on Steam since Greenlight launched, basically say that platform is getting saturated, but I find it interesting because the motions and the price points are still quite different than the mobile space. It seems like it's happening even a little bit faster than it did in mobile, but with more price compression because you're going from $60 to $5 in months sometimes for one single game.
Remember what I said?
Sale.
Platforms, platform transitions will happen faster.
Yep.
And faster and faster.
But
And the problem of, a channel's great when there's not that much noise in it. Any channel where you can reach customers, when there's not very many entrants, is awesome because now you're getting 1/20th or 1/100th of the thing rather than 750,000th of it. So as new platforms emerge, the people who are early to a platform will have a slight unfair advantage that will disappear very quickly. And again, it all gets back to, is it really an awesome experience? Early in a platform, you can put out a novel experience and do well. Later in a platform, you have to do something that's going to differentiate and be broadly audience acceptable, which is hard to do both, where, it's differentiated enough, but not so crazy that we can't get a big audience. So, that calculus is always incredibly difficult and it's not checklistable.
You said Austin needs certain things. Do they need their own platform or not?
No. You don't need here's the challenge with all platforms. Every new platform starts out without enough customers to make it worth doing it. That's and since PS2, no console has sold more than the PS2 did. They've all sold less. Every one of them. Which is not the idea of a market in advancement, it's an idea of a market in decline. So what we see is more fragmentation, smaller overall audiences, which means for software, you never sell 100%, you sell some fraction of the total. And so a new platform like the new Xbox One and the new PS4 have, 5 million now? 5 million is not a big enough market to make any money. So people are putting 40, 50, 60 million dollars in those games, can't make that money back. So they're investing in the platform guys are awesome, right? They get you to invest in them, which is kind of awesome if you're in the platform business and kind of sucky if you're in the software business and the game business. So I'm always looking for platforms with the widest possible install base first, because then I can go segment. I can say, okay, I'm not going to get everybody who uses the web. But there's a few billion people who use the web. That's a nice big number. Now, how do I find, 1 million of those guys or 100 million of those guys that I can reach and gals and say, okay, can I craft an experience that's going to work for them and attract them and make them excited about it because it's going to be familiar yet different. Is really the equation. Something where it's not off-putting, but it has a twist in it that's interesting. It's what tends to be the ones that kind of break out big time. That is, but it's not formulaic, right? Because it could be any mixture per se. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that games are kind of like music and that the distribution model is changing.
Well, being totally disrupted.
Right.
The equivalent of changing.
So what is your opinion on kind of games as a service, like online?
Well, that's all I've done for 20 years, so I think we were doing games as a service before software as a service existed, right? We were the software as a service when we were doing massively multiplayer games, early on because nobody else did stuff like that. It was, I think it's a great model for certain types of experiences. It's not a great model for every experience. Nobody's going to buy an arcade game as a service, for example, right? But there are game experiences that are more immersive that can be easily sold as, it's a lifestyle hobby. Is one way to think about it. Okay, I have some people, and they are compelled by this, and they're going to put enough time into it to call it a hobby. And then software as a service kind of makes sense. It's kind of high touch gaming versus, hands off gaming.
Well, I mean, So you have services like Spotify now. Do you ever see gaming headed towards a kind of system where you pay a subscription and get access to a bunch of games as opposed to?
Well, we've had that over and over again. It's the dream of everybody who builds a gaming company, but it's not, and here's the problem, it's rarely the dream of somebody who buys games. To say, oh, I have to stay in your ecosystem and only buy the games that you break. But what if I see a game I like that, oh, now I gotta pay twice, I gotta pay something for something else. So it's totally a internally facing desire and not a customer. It's not pro-customer, it's pro-company. And I think if we're seeing anything about all this stuff, everybody has to get a lot more pro-customer first and a lot less company, us, second. That's it.
You mentioned earlier about changing demographics and therefore changing customer base. How would you approach planning for global games as opposed to just like focused on particular countries or particular customer bases?
Well, I think that's a higher order kung fu, right? So, if making games is kind of like green belt, making games for multicultural is kind of a super high level black belt. Because none of us will ever be another culture than the one that we're from. Even people who have a multicultural background, like a real one, like they've lived in two places, are neither fish nor fowl most of the time. They don't really, a culture is something you have to immerse yourself in to understand. And we've seen, what's teased us is the games that work, right? It teases us that, this game that was hot in Japan works in the US. It teases us that, we see a couple of games work and we go, well, they should all work. Why don't they all work? What's wrong? We just didn't do it right. We didn't follow the right checklist. If we just followed the right checklist, it would have worked. And the truth is that that's all bullshit, in my experience. It's very, very difficult. You need great talent for any market you're going to go into to make your game right for that market. And if you're lucky, your game will translate easier. There's a great book to read about this called The Geography of Thought. And if you haven't read it, if you're interested at all in like moving stuff across the world, it's like it would be like a one-on-one book to start with, because it literally explains how different cultures actually think differently about the world. Totally, right? Like they don't even things that we take for granted, like the water we swim in, if we were fish, are totally alien in other cultures. So anytime a game works culture to culture, it's a wonderful miracle and mistake of some kind. So, and you can work on it hard, that you can actually get local teams, which are going to be like all local teams. How talented are they going to be? Are they going to really make it right for the market? They're going to make it their idea of what's right for the market, but are they really that good? Right? And so my best experiences have been when I've had local teams saying, okay, here's how we've got to change your game to make it work. And we're going to own the outcome. We're not just consultants telling you. They're going to make, they're going to win or die based on whether or not their changes are going to work. And then you get the real changes. And then sometimes they still die because it's a games business. It might not work even if they do everything right.
So I guess the follow-up would be, would you forecast something like League of Legends to be popular in the future because it has such a huge fan base across the world?
Well, here's what actually happens. What actually happens is you make a game in your market. You try to sell it for money up front to every other market you can get money out of, because you never know if they're going to, the betting man would say, I'm not getting any money except for whatever the money I get up front is. So I want to maximize the front end and to the expense of what happens on the back end, because likely the back end is going to be zero, right, or negative. That's what the pros in the business do, even more than they try to make them work everywhere. I think that you can't really forecast it's going to work. You can try to, you can try to say, hey, I'm going to bring in designers from other territories and they're going to help us, and we're going to make something that's pablum everywhere, rather than awesome here. And you really want to work on awesome wherever your core market is first. And then figure out if you can then translate it to other areas. I don't mean translate just the language. I'm talking about the gameplay style, the art, everything. A lot of things might have to change. And in some cases, you just look at it and go, that's not going to work. there's awesome Japanese RPGs that cannot be sold anywhere else, period, in the story. By the time you finish changing them, they'd be a whole other game. And they'd still be kind of crap, from our point, from a Western point of view. So it's, doing stuff multicultural is very difficult. Even though you see some stuff work and you go, wow, that worked. World of Warcraft worked in China. Show me one Chinese game that's worked somewhere else. One. A couple of Korean games have worked elsewhere. Pretty awesome when it happens. But there's been a crap load of Korean games. I'm talking about like a lot. There was a point where there were 400 MMOs being built in Korea at one time. And most of them shipped, and you know what that caused? That caused free to play. Free to play exists because of an oversupply in Korea of games. So people said, oh crap, we finished the game, we can't command a subscription, let's do something crazy because we got nothing to lose. And suddenly free to play was born out of an oversupply situation in Korea. So if you don't like free to play, it's all the freaking Koreans. If you love free to play, you should bless the Koreans because they had the first fully online market in the world. And they literally led the way because of that. Way before China was, blink in anybody's eye for what Korea was going. Other questions? Yes, sir.
If you've got an indie group and you think you've made something really fun, but you're an infant in the industry, and you're trying to get yourself out there and known, but at the same time you don't want your idea stolen, how do you approach it?
Well, if you made it, your idea, you made it already.
Yeah.
You've got to, you don't know it's awesome until customers play it, right? And today you're not in the place where you can put it out. So people copy, all games are copies at some level, right? It's just how artful are you about copying. So the real key is how fast can you aggregate an audience around it, if it's the right thing? Because almost all the really great games, that kind of came out and became category leaders, were actually copies of something that had come before it that just wasn't really well put together. So I would go, worry less about being copied, worry more about how do I get in front of customers faster. And start learning, because you learn from customers if you listen.
What about like early prototypes and just like super early versions of the game?
Well, then you're doing friends and families and stuff, right? You're getting, and if you stand back and let them suffer, rather than coach them through it, you will learn stuff that you need to learn. Because I rarely meet, by rarely I mean like 1 in 1,000, a designer who can design something that works the first time. Right? Works perfectly. Right? It's awesome. Our tools for doing that are very poor. And it's not that people aren't smart, it's just that there's a lot of people out there to work against. And your mental model and what the customer's mental model may not be coinciding. So you have to learn from their mistakes to fix things. Yes, sir.
You talked a lot about education, and outside of producing...
Talked a little bit about education.
Yeah, just a little bit. But outside of producing stellar talent, because I know that UT started...
Remember, education doesn't produce any talent. What education does is uncover talent and make it more presentable, make it more able to come forward. I don't think talent is made. I think talent... the talent, when it's made up here, not anywhere else. I don't mean by what they generically had, it's what they wanted. Talent comes from people actually wanting to do stuff great, more than does, they were just born awesome. Typically, they were born with the right neurons in one place or another, and they went their ass off. And what education does is give you a set of tools where you can do some of that stuff. So I'm sorry.
Oh, do you think that they?
I'm never going to give the teachers that they make talent. They don't make talent. They cover talent if they do it right.
Do you think they could be doing more to interact with the industry? Like on what level?
Oh no, they try to interact a lot. The problem is the industry's crazy busy. It's the industry's fault more than the teacher's fault, frankly. Because the teachers want people from industry there. They want the people to help them. They want their all the kids that they're working with. They want those kids to have a chance to interact with people in the industry. That's not the problem. The problem is we are overcommitted, undergunned all the time. I visit multiple campuses a year, and it's a pain in my ass to do so. And all I hear is, we wish more people would come. So if you want to get better at public speaking, you just need to go to universities. 'Cause they're going to think you're awesome even if you're inarticulate, which is the secret to my success. Other stuff? Yeah.
So one more thought on the, let's say, ecosystem situation. So other than just trying to make a, like I said, tentpole or AAA tile game, what about an engine? What if you build a gaming engine, really the game or games itself, or just advertising? This is multi-platform. We've seen this with little things like the Unreal Engine, that big.
Little things like the Unreal.
Little things like that. So let's say you had something like that, and you had a company that actually built an engine, and really the game or games themselves, just advertising the engine. Would something like that be a little?
Well, GameStyle was that at some level, and pretty much all engine companies run that way. But engines typically are, a minimal engine, 25, 30 man years.
That's what I'm saying.
Easy.
That's
Easy.
the issue is throwing a lot of manpower and money and capital.
Unity at this point is probably 400 man years.
Yeah.
It's
Unreal.
So man year, 100K.
Okay.
Man year, 100K. That's the way to, that's the back of the envelope calculation. Is, man year, 100K. Okay, shit.
So it's a
I
capital.
don't like that math. Well, it's not just capital, it's right how long.
Yeah.
You can't take 400 people and get an engine in a year,
Well, no, of course not.
right? So it's like, making a baby with 9 women in one month. Awesome. Well, at least it'll be fun.
Huge. And take Unity, and they are morphing from being an engine company into an asset store to a publishing platform.
Yeah, they're gonna do all this stuff.
And that's the other thing we really didn't touch on here is that this sort of opportunity is also the bummer's part of the story is that you can get very high end, well, you can get all the engines for free.
Okay.
So you can download Unity for free. And
There's
if you want to
engine
do
wars
the Pro
going on
Vision
now.
version, you can pay $50 a month. So you can get Unreal, you can get even Crytek now,
Yeah.
which is the most typical of all those 3D use.
There's actually another engine being built here in Austin right now.
So what
I
you
know about it.
typically
So-
got are high school students
Crazy.
that are downloading this stuff, they're teaching themselves C# or C++ or JavaScript, and they're getting a friend does artwork, and they're cranking out games. Sort of a zillion people doing it with these free engines, basically.
Don't forget to email me if you want the deck or if you want any of the stuff I promised you. I have lots of documents. I have the document of every VC in town. I have the document, the links to all these other crazy things that are cool if you're thinking about making a company. Because making a company is another metagame that goes with gaming too. So
Can we post your slides on our forum, or do you want to just do it this way, or do you want to put your
yeah, I don't see.
just your contact
I have to
info?
look at it again, make sure I didn't put anything. I think all that stuff is totally stealable. So yeah. So,
You got that one page, you say go to this link, go to that link.
oh yeah, that's all on there. But I have some, like some documents that aren't attached to it, right? That aren't linkable.
Oh, okay, well, whatever.
Let's go from the
Can you
chambers.
sanitize it and maybe just give us one reference page or whatever?
Yeah,
Put it up
it's
there.
it's fine the way it is. I just have some other stuff that could go with it.
Okay.
So feel free to email me. Just say, oh yeah, I was at your talk, so I know what you're talking about. I'm not just a praise stalker. Not that I get. The problem with being in the game business is you don't get big word pieces. What kind of entertainment business is this? Anything else? Any other fun stuff? Thank you for coming. Thanks for spending. Oh, one more.
Yeah, so Austin's weird, and
I never noticed.
yeah, virtual reality is pretty weird too. Would you say Austin's the best location for virtual reality to sprout at?
So I'll just, my virtual reality thing is I think that it's challenging. So this is the 4th time I've seen this wave come by. Maybe this is the time that it'll actually make it, maybe not. Hardware is always a bitch. Anything that requires hardware that's not a mass market, tens of millions of people kind of thing is a bitch. It's too expensive. It's a problem. Hardware is totally scalable. The bigger the scale, the cheaper it gets, really fast. But if you can't get the big scale, it's really hard to scale the price down. So I think, I'm not high on the VR stuff myself because I've seen it come and go, and it's really sexy and it's really It's fun to play with, it's awesome, but if you have 600,000 customers to start with, it's really hard to make a business. Because you get 10% of them, and you're going, oh, well, that's 60,000, but you probably won't get 10%, you'll get 5, and that's 30,000, and now you're going, okay, and that's if they all still use it, and it's not sitting on the shelf. Oh crap, maybe it's only 3,000 when you don't get down to it. It's really hard to make things work. That's all. For me, install base is really always the starting point. Because no matter how big that addressable audience is, your actual audience is going to be really a tiny fraction of it, unless you just get super. It's always about segmenting the audience down to what you want to, who do you want to address, and the tighter you make that segment, the more likely you are to resonate exactly right with it. The broader it is, the harder it is to make something resonate with a lot of people who are not really the same, they're different. Anything else? Awesome. Thank you, guys.